Hello, and welcome to this episode of Untold Chapters with Austin Macauley Publishers. Today we have an exclusive interview with Marvin Dixon, author of Fool's Gold, the latest in his Justin Kell thriller series. Stay tuned to hear about the inspiration behind the characters in this fast-paced novel. Good morning, Marvin. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here to discuss your latest novel, Fool's Gold. Can you tell us a bit about the genesis of this series and what inspired you to write about crime thrillers set in London?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. It's lovely to be here. I've always been an avid reader, and for a long time in my adult life, I always thought it would be great if I could sit down and write a novel. So it was one of my, ambitions for quite some time. But then back in, I think it was in 2012, I was working in London, which, in the world of financial services. And I came across this, I was on a project involving life settlement funds, which, without being too geeky about it, were genuine investments, life policies that were very popular in the United States. And it was that sparked the idea originally for the first book, Settlement, because I thought, what could the bad guys do if they were exposed to this type of how they could use these investments to their advantage? And that was the sort of a kernel, a little seed that started to grow. Then finally, because I talked about it for so long, various friends and family were saying, "When are you going to write that book? So I started in, I think it was 2018, and basically that was the beginning of it all. And once I started the writing process, it was something that just seemed to be in my blood, because I've kept it going now through 5 books and a number of years. So that was the start of it, yeah.
Your first book in the series, as you mentioned, Settlement, was very well received. What can readers expect from Fool's Gold in terms of plot, characters, and setting?
Yeah, well, Fool's Gold, it's the 5th book in the Justin Kell series. I think the thing that binds it all together is the continuity. Each book starts pretty much exactly where the previous one has finished. So that means I've got a platform to tell not just the stories of the individual novels, but also of the lives of the main characters, Justin Kell, Molly Cribbs, Chris Packham, who are the 3 people who are up in centre. The setting, like most of my books, is London. That's where the heart of it takes place. But it does take us to other parts of the UK this time, briefly in the Cotswolds and the Northwest, and also down into East Anglia slightly. And these are all sorts of places that I'm familiar with, which help, hopefully, with the description of the plot. Fool's Gold fundamentally is about an investment scam. There's a new bad guy in there called Bernie Aubert, and a couple of new characters who help to drive the plot along. So it'll be hopefully what readers are expecting, but with a few twists and turns along the way.
Can you talk about the research that went into writing this novel?
Research is something that fundamentally, I think, like most authors, I do it firsthand. Somebody like me, I don't have a team of people or anyone like that who can help me. So it's a case about writing, what I know about. So throughout the series, a good example is in Payback, which is the 2nd book. There's a scene there set in a courtroom. So what I did for that was I went over to Manchester Crown Court and spent the day in the public gallery watching various cases. So the research for Fool's Gold was fundamentally on my experience in financial services for this one. The backdrop, of course, is COVID. And I think we've all got plenty of experience of that, torrid time in 2020 and 2021. And that's another driver of the story. So the research was relatively easy for Fool's Gold. In some of the other books, it's been a little bit more difficult, where I've gone into areas that I've not as familiar with. But fundamentally, I do all the research myself, and hopefully that comes out as in the storylines.
How did the idea for the character of Justin Kell come about?
At the start, my objective was to write one book, but I always thought in the back of my mind that it would be great to write a series. I love reading series, whether it's crime series, fantasy series, any series really. And I thought, well, if I do that, I need a central character who's going to be, realistic. So Kell came along, and at the outset, I didn't want him to be a policeman. There's so many great, it's a crowded genre, isn't it? Crime fiction, but there's so many great authors with great characters. So he started out life as a financial journalist, and then, not sure if it was him or me, turned him into a private investigator as we went through a couple of the stories. And I think that was hopefully going to give me some continuity to tell the story of Justin Kell and his life, as well as the individual narrative of the novels.
Do you have a favourite character to write about other than Justin?
The three main people, Justin, Molly, and Chris Packham, they're centre. I suppose what I really do like is developing these new characters. There's always somebody who's got to, one way or another drive the plot forward. In Fool's Gold, it's Vicky Taylor, as well as Bernie, who's the main crook in it. And I like to sort of see where their characters go and where they lead me. And I quite enjoy, in terms of one of the favourite parts of the writing, is seeing how that works. Packham, who's the detective in it, and a friend of Justin's, either intentionally or subconsciously, I've kept him slightly in the background or on the side, because I knew that somewhere down the road there would be a book where he was going to be front and central. And so in the book I'm currently writing, there's going to be a lot more about Chris Packham, because I think he's, in terms of being one of my favourites, it'll be interesting to see how he features in the next book when that comes out.
Can you describe your writing process for this series?
Well, it's quite easy for me, but I think the background to it, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. So that's, and I say that because it must have been in the late 90s, he wrote his book on writing, which he describes how he goes about, a bit of autobiography in there, but his approach to it. And that's very much that get the concept of the story, put some characters around it, and then let the story tell itself, or let the characters tell the story. And the way that I do that is sort of dedicate a part of each day to writing. So I'm pretty much a morning person. So most days I'm in my study at 8 o'clock and I am writing. I don't set myself any daily goals in terms of word count or pages or paragraphs. But on a good day, I guess I can write between 1,500 and 2,000 words. On a bad day, when it's just not there's nothing flowing or anything, it can be as few as 500 words. But the key for me is that each day I progress the story one way or another. Once the first draft's completed, I don't worry too much about continuity and everything else and typos in the first cut. I'll read it myself, tidy it up a little bit, not too much. Then it goes to my two unpaid editors. I've got my elder brother, Bill, who's very good. He does write himself a lot of non-fiction stuff for genealogy and family history websites. He's very practical, very hard-nosed, very brutal in his feedback, which is good. And then there's Robin Stiles, who's works at Leeds University. He himself is a published author. And he comes in with the imaginative bit and the craft of the storytelling as well. So I get feedback sort of from both sides from these two guys. And then that's with me as to how I factor that and what I use to put into the story. And then with a bit of tidying up, I've got something that I'm ready to share with Austin Macauley.
Sort of, you've got a very disciplined approach that seems to work for you.
It is, because if you're going to, I don't know how long it takes from start to finish, but to get the first draft, it's what, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, depending, because life does get in the way as well, even with a very, disciplined, approach to it all. So, but yeah, I think you've got to do that if you want to produce something that you're happy with and happy to be out there for people to read. Yeah.
Are there any authors other than Stephen King or books that have influenced your writing style?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, that, because I'm sure there are. I mean, as I said, I read a lot. I mean, there's some brilliant stories out there. The Roy Grace series by Peter James. The late Peter Robinson. I loved his Alan Banks books. And recently, I just finished Ellie Griffiths and her Ruth Galloway series, which was quite interesting because she'd slightly different because her main character, Ruth, is an archaeologist. So I'm sure these things influence you subconsciously. But I also read a lot of fantasy. I'm just reading Sarah J. Maas at the minute in her Glass Throne series.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers who are interested in writing crime fiction?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I think, we've touched on it already, really. You've got to be dedicated. It's got to be something you really and passionately wanted to do. It's not something, you can't do it half-heartedly, and you've got to enjoy it. And if you put those things into the novel, whether it's a novel or a short story or whatever it might be, then I think that you'll be successful. So really enjoy it and find a process like I've talked about that works for me, that works for you. Find something that works, but stick to it. Get your concept and let the story tell itself.
And finally, you've mentioned you're working on a sequel already and that we'd maybe see more of Chris Packham. Is there anything else you can tease about that?
Well, it's going to be a little bit different, this book, in that it moves out of the world of, if you like, financial crime into the world of medicine, which is quite strange, I suppose. And it's like where you get your ideas from your book from. I have a very good friend of mine who lives in Perth in Australia. He's a doctor, quite an eminent doctor in Australia. He was over last Christmas or Christmas before, and we were talking about books, and he basically had this idea for a book stroke business stroke something. And that just puts the thought in my mind that some of the things that John had said could be great for a Justin Kell novel. And so that, going back to what I said earlier, that's the concept. So we're in a different world here. I've got a great guy on hand for the research, as we've talked about, and I'm going through that. But yeah, Chris Packham, we're going to find out a lot more about Chris in this book. And he's going to be one of the central characters. So I'm about halfway through it now. So first draft should be finished at some point early next year. And as you know, the process will then begin. So yeah, that's book 6 in the Justin Kell series, something to watch out for. Yeah.
Good. We really look forward to that. Well, thank you, Marvin, for taking the time to appear in this episode of Untold Chapters. It's been great talking to you and having you share your story with us.
Lovely, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Untold Chapters. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. There will be a link in the description for our author, Marvin Dixon, and his book, Fool's Gold. If you're listening on Spotify, please follow and give this episode a star review.